please, I will do whatever you need to do to be safe. So,
I think you're in a good district.
okay, perfect. So I am Brent Coffeman. I do work for Nebo School District. I have been in education. This is my 30th year. I primarily have been at Nebo School District, with a year in Provo School District, a year in Nebo School District, and then 20 years with BYU teaching adjunct in the afternoons, and then 18 years with Mountain View and Timpanogos hospitals doing crisis down at ER.
You're 107
I
apparently.
am 107. I just run 24-hour days. That's what it's turned into. So I'm done with a couple of those jobs, and this being an administrator for special education for the last 5 years. So, so hopefully I'll have some things that I can share with you that will be exciting, and some things that are informative that we can talk about. Again, you see these disclaimers. I'm not an attorney. I'm not your attorney. But nonetheless, I hopefully will talk and lead you to resources that will be really helpful. Again, my disclosure, I do work for Nebo since I know this is charter. I do have kids that have been in charter, love them. For the Spanish, I have 2 Spanish speakers in my house because of charter, so thank you. Let's just start out a little bit. So tell me just maybe briefly who you are. Administrators, other parts of where you're at.
My name is Michelle Altman-Zima.
Okay.
I'm with the American Preparatory Academy, and I'm our SPED coordinator for the district.
Perfect.
I'm Jody Jensen, American Preparatory Academy, and I do what she tells me to do.
All right.
And I'm so glad. But first I ask her what to do.
There you go.
And I tell her to do it.
Tell me to do it.
I'm Danielle Alvarez, and I'm Freedom Prep, the Special Ed Director.
Okay.
I'm Mary Keene, I'm a major prep, and I'm the SPED director also.
Perfect.
Pete Jensen, police academy, I'm the executive director.
I'm Gwen Andres, I'm at Promontory School of Expeditionary Learning, and I'm the instructional coach.
I'm Christina Hollander, Special Education Director for Treeside Charter School.
All right. Wonderful. So got a little variety here. First of all, I just want to start out with this, just talking about, because I'm going to go one slide further and then come back to it. Just think about some of the purposes of why your charters were created in the first place. You know, they were doing something different, right? There had been education, mainly some bits of private schools, and then mainly public education. And then this idea of school choice and opportunities, innovation came about. And so you start to look at charter schools throughout the nation coming about and creating a lot of opportunity in ways that maybe weren't available at the school that unfortunately your home was located in. And so now what do I do? And so you saw some specialization. We see charter schools focused on just autism, for example, or special education, or engineering, or other arts, particularly drama. So you see specialization, you see independence from this local school boards of saying, hey, we just need someone that's listening to us, and so you get a little bit of difference there. Freedom to do a little bit more than some of the rules are keeping us in place on. Innovation and school choice. So those are some things that are why many of these schools operate. So going back, we start to look at that there is a supremacy clause, and that really focuses on, especially when we talk about disabilities, there's this idea, IDEA, and that stands to help students with disabilities not be discriminated against. And so as we go through some of this, think about that umbrella of what you're trying to put some practices in place that sometimes butt up against the overall arching theme. Not because you're trying to be discriminatory, but those things just by virtue of they are on different sides of the platform are going to butt heads at times, right? And you've seen that maybe in your discussions through IEPs, or as maybe some of you have had some more formalized complaints, then you get to deal with that in a different way. The other thing that when we start to talk to parents, we talk in a vocabulary that's very different. Like, it's just not normal. And so my daughter now is a preschool teacher. I'm a special educator. My son's now an educator. And my wife's none of the above except all the above in our own house. but we start talking, and we start talking like this. BTT, babe, booba, bib, you know, all these kind of things that are going on. And she doesn't understand a word of what we're talking about. And I realize how much I talk that way when I'm in meetings and with parents. I'm like, oops, they're missing out on the boat. So that's one of the things as we start to talk about our roles in with the parents that we serve. Think about just all the vernacular that we're using that these parents have no idea is meaning. And we just talked 2 pages and probably only that much of special education, and yet we do it every day. And I've listened to teachers over and over and IEPs and administrators talk in a language that our parents have no clue what we're talking about. So just be aware of that. I've also given you a handout. And this one talks about the crucial moments, and those crucial moments have designed this a couple different ways, but this is an idea of what can we do as administrators, as teachers in the classroom, as special educators, to take the time to look at every one of those and dive in deeply at how we can better train and make a difference in the IEP process as we work with our customers, which are our parents in most cases. And you know, if we start to look at it as what can we do to serve you, kind of the kind of the Starbucks model or something like that, without giving everything away. You can't do that because then we would have nothing left to be able to serve other students. But we can talk about it in terms of how can we be pleasant, how can we listen, how can we take the time to make sure we understand what it is the parents truly asking for. And that way we start to break this down a little bit and look at the opportunities we have to make a difference in the IEP process. And any one of these missed opportunities can turn into some of the protective rights that they have as a parent of a student with a disability. And whether that student has an articulation of an R or all the way to someone that's homebound in bed with a full-time nurse and everything else, they have the same exact rights to special education. And so something that maybe is frustrating at times, but it's something that's a reality that we get to face, especially as directors in the special education world. So take a look at that, see if there's things that might be helpful or can train out, but we've tried to break down those parts that can make a difference. So what are some of the hot topics going on? What are some things that you're hearing about in your charter schools? And we'll go through some that I'm seeing as well.
You would ask that. Now I have to actually think.
Okay.
One of
So,
the biggest hot topics I've been hearing about is the value of inclusion specifically for autistic children.
Excellent. And you're getting both sides of that. Ones that want exclusively, like, I don't want to be in the mainstream, I want to be in a special classroom, why do I have to go through all this? And the other ones that are, they can't even, like, there is not one aspect of this that they can really participate, and they want them all day long front and center in the classroom. Absolutely. Another hot topic.
Well, the certainly the issue of how to serve students during COVID remotely and et cetera, but you know, I have to go back to what I feel is the hot topic. You have it in your first slide where you state the federal law trumps state law.
Yeah.
And that they're not allowed to make state laws that violate federal law.
And we do, we get caught up in that. And I think, you know, when you start talking about our legislature to a USB, to a charter board, or to a school board, there's all kinds of stuff that just really interact in a way that don't position us well in special education. We always have to be the one that has to raise our hand, and we're trying so hard to be part of regular education. All these kids are regular education first, and then here we are turning into
Micromanagers.
yeah, and saying
We
you can't do
aren't.
that. You can't.
We aren't. Some people are.
Yes.
We're seeing a huge increase in new referrals due to the COVID.
Okay.
So students were struggling and they weren't doing well with the remote learning, and now we're having a huge spike.
Remote's a big part of that. I know there's charter online, there's district online, but that's not what we were set up for all kids, was it? There's no way to be able to do it. I mean, that's why we have in school systems, and we're not able to access what we favor and what we do well. So just a couple other things. You know, this one's not as hot, but you get it a little bit. One of you said Treeside. Treeside is a Montessori school, right? Or similar philosophy.
Methods, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a methodology that might be different than someone else. Now, mostly you'll get people interested in that, but every once in a while you get someone that just wanders in your doors and they're like, we're not doing that. And they're like, what do you mean we're not doing that? That's what we're doing. So you get these methodology things. You get LRE, which is what you were talking about with the autism student. We still get manifestation determinations, like it's part of my disability that I'm doing that. Seclusion and restraint continues to be one, and I think obviously with police awareness, that's also still hitting the schools as well. Along with that, our behavior support plans and VIPs continue to be one of those nebulous areas of when do I need to formalize and not, so we'll talk a little bit about that. The power of the prior written notice, and then money and resources. That's affected at least one or more charter schools in this area, or at least in Salt Lake, and that affects special education nationally of funding and resources. So we'll go through some cases and some scenarios related to each of these, and then we'll leave some time for questions here at the end as well. So how many waivers did we get for COVID-19? Here we have all these pandemic things we've never experienced before, and we get a grand total of 1 waiver. I don't know what to say. That's not right. I bet you've had people working harder than they've ever worked and are further behind than they've ever been. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And I think someone was saying we have a charter school of like 5 adults really that can manage the entire school, and we're dealing with everything plus this, and it's just unmanageable. It's unsustainable. So, transitions part C to B, that probably doesn't affect some of your charters. You don't have a preschool, it doesn't matter, So if you do, then hello, you got 1 waiver. Outside of that, it's putting a lot of undue pressure, undue unrealistic situations in place. There are a couple tools that we do have. If someone is being evaluated for being a specific learning disability student, then they can have an extension beyond the 45 school days if the parent and the team agree. But that's the only one, and sometimes we don't know that that's really what we're evaluating for until we're halfway through the evaluation. So, kind of hard to know how to use that tool. It is one we have. Also, we've kind of all been served. Some of you may have seen this lawsuit come about, but the case purports to be brought against every single school district, and I am suing charter every single student with a disability across the United States. It's coming out of New York, and requiring, because of the school closure and requiring students to be at home, then we have failed our students with disabilities. I'm sure we have sometimes, but I don't know that. Yeah, if the school burns down, I don't know what to do. It's gone. We're there, and that's kind of what happened. And so, just be aware that the judge is saying that I don't know if you have quite the authority to pull that off across the entire nation for right here. But be aware, parents and advocacy groups are holding on to this saying, what are you going to do for my kid as a result of COVID? That's what we're going to figure out. Then we start to look at this, and I think this is where some real power from Julie Weatherly and some other of the lawyers and advocates for schools are coming out, is talking about, hey, I don't know if compensatory is the right word for this. We're talking recovery. We're all in a situation. It's not just special education that's suffering. I don't know how many of you had kids during this last 6 months, but I think our regular ed kids probably have suffered quite a bit as well in what their trajectory was to what they received in the regular education component, much less the special, much more even the special ed. So I want to have you look at this with more of a recovery response. So what are we going to do to be more proactive in the way that we respond to our parents' concerns and to our concerns with our students? That's probably the bigger concern. We're concerned about them just as equally as the parent, and we have not been able to provide the services that we wanted to over a period of time now. So what obligation? Be proactive, start to look at that, and start to maybe offer a little more in ways that you can manage over a time period. Maybe that's between now and next August again, that we really start to really have some interference with intervention again for students. There are going to be some that because we didn't get this, we might have some compensatory. We simply couldn't provide a service. Or we have a teacher that we thought was providing a service, and they weren't providing a service. That's probably the one I'm most concerned about, is the ones that we thought were going really well, and we find out, no, that didn't happen. So, you know, it remains to see what the extent of the courts are. We're starting to see some flavors of that coming out of the different areas. Florida's kind of like, I don't think the courts and the administration and the education department are identifying that there was a pandemic. There were some things that we were limited as a result of that. So they're trying to weigh that into their courts. Others are saying, you know what, there were no waivers, we have to stick to what the rules are. So you're seeing a little bit of that. Florida being more of, hey, we need some exceptions. You're seeing New York and other places saying, what's the big deal? Even though they're backlogged 18 months already in their courts. So, you know, it's affected everybody else. It probably will affect education. Here's a finding that the child was not entitled to compensatory education because the district acted reasonably and the parent was largely responsible for the lack of education for that student. And I'm sure you've seen that as well, where you just see absence. They haven't logged in once to Canvas, parents are nowhere to be found. And so because you interfered with the process of your child's learning, you didn't get to serve your child. We wanted to, we were ready, we were willing, but we didn't have the accessibility to your child. So that was one from a previous case, but it's similar to what's going on now. This one in New York. Parent wanted in-person services. The school's like, we're a little scared of this COVID. I don't know if we're really wanting to do this. So the U.S. District Court said in-person services for autism to the extent that it can safely do it. So I don't know if that really answered the question, because like, well, that's our concern in the first place, where we would be in your home doing this. And so I don't know the answer to that, but they're going to say, did you do everything you possibly could to provide that service? Did you do more than just say my Zoom meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning? If you did, then you're going to probably be fine. But I assume that that's probably what happened in this case. They probably said this is our regularly scheduled time, and here we go. Everything else they were able to provide in a timely and appropriate manner. It was more the student's ABA therapy, which is someone kind of holding on to a student hand over hand and doing things. And I'm sure that ABA therapist was like, I don't know if I want to be in that situation, and then that puts handcuffs to the district. So, and that was just out of this year. Here's another one out of 2020. They wanted their assessment done right away, and they're like, I don't know that we can do our assessment right away. So they failed to establish that the child would suffer irreparable harm if we weren't able to do this until a reasonable time come to pass that we could get this in place. So, you know, so that's a court in Jacksonville that's saying, hey, we're in a pandemic here. Let's relax a little bit. Here's another one. Pandemic changes, related changes to the IEP don't excuse failure to modify assignments. So they actually met and did some things, but then the regular ed teacher probably didn't get all that into place on the IEP. Maybe it wasn't communicated to them. I'm not sure what happened. But by failing to include the parent in the development of that plan, so I think they probably went around and said, every plan gets the same plan. And we know that doesn't work in special ed. The height of IEPs is it's an individualized education plan. So make sure you're remembering that we don't just say, as a charter school, this is what we're doing, or as a school district, this is what we're doing. You can't do that. You say, for individuals, we will be putting into place plans based on that student's need. And I think that's probably the key to most everything we do is individualized. Again, I will be sending all this out through Joyland, so you'll have this exact slide, so for all of it. Here's one. This one's not so nice. This is a one-day gap, okay? I don't know about you in trying to start your school years up this year. Everything looked really good until trying to get remote and this, some of you are on A-day, B-day schedules, everything else. It looked really good on the in-class on day one. I don't know, we were hiring remote teachers the day after school started because people walked away, people retired. They had, I believe I heard 800 additional teachers leave the profession in Utah alone this year that they were not planning. Okay? And that all happened the week school started, I think, for a lot of our teachers. So 800, that's a lot. That's at least one per school or more. And so this one was denied FAPE to a student with a speech impairment by failing to provide special education services through distance learning during the first day of extended school. So are we all guilty of that somewhere? I'm sure all of us have at least missed the first week. Most of us have our speech therapists, at least at the school year, doing speech screenings, kindergarten assessments, I don't know what they're doing, hearing screenings. That, you know, I start to get concerned when I hear that kind of language during a pandemic that perfection is expected. You know, that's not even giving us a week into there to try to make up that service. So be aware of that. Realize that some courts are just not being lenient in this process. Here's another one. This is a methodology, but you get some of these from maybe private schools, or you've had some parents that have done some unique things through their IEPs because they haven't followed the traditional ways of going maybe from, you know, here we get a reading and a math, we have maybe a psych and an OT. You get some of these interesting ones that, you know, in this case they were doing conductive therapy for their OT services. And they go into a school that had more of a holistic approach, which was probably in general skills that were being taught to the student. And then because the student was making progress, the judge says, you're fine. And it goes back to that methodology that most of the time courts are not going to get involved in methodology as long as you're making progress. Once you don't make progress, then you better start involving the parent and figure out what you can do to make sure the student's progressing in light of their circumstances. So here's kind of the lesson learned I put on this one. Use data to make decisions. If progress is occurring, then press forward with your procedures. I was involved with a state complaint the first week before I was actually a coordinator in Nebo School District over special ed. And that complaint alleged that the parent wanted a certain methodology for a student to be used. And the school district had a different methodology that actually had reduced the behavior from well over 100 inappropriate behaviors. They weren't harmful, but they were just interfacing with being able to be making progress in the general curriculum. And they got that down to like 5 or 10 a day. Like, it was an incredible amount. And the parent came in and said, you can't do that, that's not fair. And so this team resorted back to what the parent wanted, and it went out of control again, and then mom got mad because the behavior was out of control. So the complaint goes on. So what do you think the finding to that complaint would be?
You knew better, you're the specialist.
You knew better. That's exactly what it
Or at
is.
least you should know better.
You know better. What did you not rely on in that one? The data. The data said you knew what you were doing, and you didn't. So that gives us power. That's one of the tools that I think is very powerful in an IEP team. If we're doing things well, press forward. If you're not doing things well, regroup. Try again. Injury's still hot, you know, it's still not all the way worked out in the courts. They're still trying to find that balance between what is circumstances and, you know, self-contained versus resource. There's some differences there that we still have not seen litigated really well. We were probably hoping for some direction this year. We're not going to get it. You know, that we're going to be filled with courts over COVID and other things versus some of the things that are more relevant to us. You know, what we do know is this is out of 10th Circuit. 10th Circuit's our court area, so we have to have particularly mindful that this is affecting the Utah area, and we need to do more than the merely de minimis. Before we just said, oh, they're doing fine. Now we've got to show they're doing fine and what they're doing, and is it really measuring up to what we would expect for that type of student that we're working with. Someone mentioned LRE, the student with autism. They want to be in school all day long. You know, there's cases almost every month that I see going through the LRP talking about least restricted. Most of them related to a Downs or Down syndrome student, or a student with autism, or a student with some kind of syndrome getting more and more. And it seems like the big delineator that I see is how much of that student's presence is impacting the group environment. If it's not, you're probably going to see that student mostly in that classroom. If it is impacting the other learning, then you're going to likely see courts rule in the way of moving them away from the classroom. This is a case that talks a little bit about that was out of the 10th Circuit, so this is relevant to our area, which happened last year. First, the court considered whether a student can be educated satisfactorily in the regular ed setting. That's a pretty broad term. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I would assume more than de minimis. They're making some progress in that regular environment. Second, the court is to consider whether or not this student has received mainstreaming to the maximum extent appropriate. So one of the concerns is sometimes we have the special classrooms where we just isolate the students. And they're saying we don't want that and we don't want maybe all-day mainstream. What is the way that we can interact that student on the continuum? So that would be the two things. One would be behavior. Second would be, have we included them in areas that they can have some success in? And courts put a lot of emphasis on that. Of what are you doing to get them involved as many times during the day into the regular environment? This one, he could not receive satisfactory education in the general ed setting, even though the district had made attempts to accommodate, modify, add staff members, do other things multiple times. And then again, here it is, student was disobedient, defiant, and violent, which necessitated teacher response. And I think that's probably what tipped the scale of, yes, you can remove the student for parts of the day. And I think they have done some things to show, but there are times of the day when he is appropriate. So make sure you're looking at it. Don't make it an all or nothing special classroom. I think most of them have gone to that point. But occasionally you get someone with a different philosophy. What about autism? You know, we actually had a lawsuit in Nebo back in 2003, where we had a student that was qualified under autism. This was the big thing where they wanted speech and OT and 40 hours a week of ABA. I don't think we're seeing as many of those requests anymore because insurance for some families has picked up the ABA component, at least for the after school hours on a birth to like a 3 to 5 year old. But we still have obligation to make progress in the general curriculum. So they rejected the preschool saying, hey, we want a regular ed preschool with that service because we think our kid's not disabled, they just, or not that kind of disability, they're just a little disabled. So somewhere they got to the point of 15 hours a week of ABA was appropriate. Parents filed due process saying, but that's not the right preschool. So hearing officer ruled that Nebo made an offer of faith that was appropriate. Parents, or the state then said, hey, that looks good to us, you're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And then the 10th Circuit, remember that 10th Circuit now 3 times in a row? So we got 10th Circuit. They said, hey, you don't have, so actually that was a 51% typical preschool that they were in. And they said, no, she should have been the only one with a disability in that preschool. I don't know about you, but I don't have very many regular ed preschools in our department. I realize most of you don't have to deal with that. But one of the things that I did learn in this is that we really have to consider placement of that student. That if they are in a situation that they could be making progress in typical developing peers, then we got to get there as much as we can. That really goes back to LRE. These are the expensive cases. These are the ones that are annoying because we know what our staff members are going through, and it reminds me of like a robber that gets off, and then you finally catch them, but you can't account for all the other things. You're only catching them for that one point, and that's kind of what's going on here. All the good things our teachers are doing, we're not able to document in a way that shows the bigger picture of all that our staff are doing to make sure that student has success. So, the bottom line is, the case received national attention. Consensus was the court got it wrong. This should have been a methodology case, and they made it into a placement case. So, I don't know if that's the case or not, but 9 out of 10 believe that they got it wrong. But with it being 10th Circuit, I wouldn't try it again in our area. So, just a quick thing as we go into some of the behavior things going on in the courts right now. Remember 10-day rule in special education, we get that 10th day, we have to have services on the 11th day. Look for patterns, look for whether or not they brought a weapon and they're gone for 10 days, something like that. But on that 11th day, get that services in place. Remember we have special circumstances that even if it's part of their disability, weapons, drugs, and severe bodily injury, then we can go ahead and continue to suspend them up to 45 days in an interim alternate educational setting. And then requires at minimum a review or revision of the FUBA and BIP, and if they haven't had one, then we need to develop one if they hit that 10-day mark. So those are
What does it
just,
say? I noticed that that's an option in the LMBI guidelines for the map, the flow chart they have, but I didn't identify that it was required you have to do a FUBA and a BIP.
yeah,
I mean,
I'll
it's
have to look,
considered, you have to
I'll look
consider
really
it.
quick and see, but I don't know if that's when you hit the 45-day interim alternative that you have
For
to,
say school
or
safety
if it's the
violation.
10th day, yeah. I will look and see, so maybe,
Because, I mean, I bring that up because we had a circumstance where a student brought a weapon, first time ever having this type of an event, but because they were ADHD, it was identified that it was a product or connected to his disability. And there was no need for a BIP or a FUBA because this was a one-time thing, and we just did the IAES.
Yeah.
It was not a big deal.
and that's what I gotta find out is once you do that, does that trigger the FUBA and BIP? Because I know it requires at a minimum review or revision, but if there's not one there, does it then require? But I think if it's the FUBA, I think if it's
I'd
that,
love to have that.
yeah, I'll look at that real
Fine,
quick
because
before we're out.
probably not the common thing,
No,
but for this kid, it was just not necessary.
no.
But you're safer to do it, and sometimes it's better to just, be safe than take a chance.
Yeah, we'll talk about some things here at the end, just like that. When in doubt,
That's good
we
point,
just gotta
yeah.
do it, but. Remember that they're conducted by the student's IEP team, including the parents, see if it's part of their disability, and whether or not it's a failure of us to have put things in place. Every once in a while, I run a manifestation, and it's clearly, we weren't following the BIP, that's our problem, that's on us. Kids, get back to class, teachers, we're gonna train you better. And that's a hard thing to say when you're putting your own, that's ratting out your own team, but sometimes the reality is that's what's happening. And I would rather be honest and upfront than deal with it on the back end of that, of trying to cover something up that was clearly on us. So here's some things related to manifestation determination. So this one's kind of serious. We get parents and students concerned when they start seeing edgy things, right, that are related to death or shooting or guns pointed at people. So this one, off-campus selfies depicting a student with a TBI holding a gun with the caption, "I love it when they run." That's probably not a nice thing. I know it's not a nice thing. Along with other social media posts that didn't justify an Arkansas district's decision to remove the student from campus. In upholding two hearing officer decisions, the court held that the evidence wasn't strong enough to support the district's argument that the student needed to be removed because he was a danger of self to others. So what they're basically saying, that was a freedom of speech. He could have maybe some suspension time, but he's not getting out of there for 45 days, part of his disability or something. So in addition to the photo with the gun, the student allegedly posted other threats on social media about self-harm and harming peers. Once the district became aware of the post, it recommended expulsion. So maybe that's where it got a little bit.
Yeah, without a threat assessment.
Yeah. And so that's why I said sometimes you really need to go back and do a threat assessment. And I don't know that you don't need someone expert in that area. Sometimes it's just sitting around with the team and saying, okay, what are our assets here? Okay, the kid has a TBI. He's obviously gotten to a website he's perseverating on, and he's having fun with this. We need it to stop. But I don't know that suspending him is the right way to do that. When kind of one time you're out for a weapon was in kind of the schools for a little while, that like anytime you brought one, you're out for the year. We had a lot of kids that like to fish down in Salem and Santa Clara and every other community in our state, right? And they always had their little fishing knife with them, and they'd show up, and sure enough, they'd pull it out, look what I got for my birthday. And next thing you know, they're up for a 45-day getting out of town. And I think that's why you need this. You need realism. You need common sense amongst all the minds that are going on and making decisions. And so sometimes we get caught up in the rules, And sometimes we get caught up in the bleeding heart for the kid, and somewhere I think we need to look at what is it that's appropriate? What's the way that we get with this student?
So I'm a little confused on this one. They're saying there wasn't enough evidence to say that they should suspend him or expel him. Is that what the court's saying?
Yeah, and it's interesting because there were other posts about the self-harm and
And
harm
it
to
still said
others.
there was no threat.
Yeah. One of the things that you'll find with that, and maybe they said it was part of his disability, I don't have enough information. Let's say they said it was part of his disability. If it was, then where it would take place is, was there enough on there to show serious bodily harm? Because that's the only exception to removing a student out for the harm area. So if there wasn't any harm, then we can't move that student because it's part of his disability. If there was harm, then we probably can. That's what I think the court's probably
Wait for
focusing
somebody
on
gets
there.
hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a
absolutely.
regular ed kid doing the same thing, it's
They'd
a
be
different
out.
law, they're
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, so
So
kind
if you're
of,
the parent of a child that goes to the school, do you care if the child is a special needs student or not?
you know, I would hope that,
I mean, I am a parent of a special needs student, so I absolutely care, don't get me wrong here, but,
no.
you know, the scenario,
But taking the circumstances, so maybe not expulsion wasn't appropriate, but let's say they say
Certainly,
10 days
yeah.
or something
yeah,
like that.
time to do a threat assessment and to help him figure out this website, they're mocking you or whatever.
Yeah, that's why I go back to here, is
Yeah,
really
I
take
agree.
your team's expertise
I agree.
and stand by your expertise. Don't just follow the rule of this is what we do for all kids. I imagine that's what they do for all kids. Did you
Probably.
take into him special
Yeah.
circumstances?
Yeah,
And I really think that what they did next, so the positive behavior interventions, those are key for school to show good faith. So if you just expel, a student with a disability, we have to do more than just discipline them. So there's a discipline part, but then we have to,
where's the support? There's
Yeah.
no
Exactly.
support.
That's
and if
it.
they expose, this district is still responsible, maybe change placement into a treatment program or something like that. You don't just send a kid off and a kid with a disability.
Hope he shows up at some other school.
Exactly.
afterwards, that doesn't
Exactly.
solve any problem.
It's still
And
our
that's a good-
responsibility, so I think in that case, I agree with the court.
That's why the BIP is important, because that's how you're going to teach them.
Yeah.
So,
That's, I think, a good lesson out of this. Another tool that you have
Yeah.
is you do have placement. You can consider placement.
It's hard as the charter schools though.
It is very hard, very hard.
so Brent, I just pulled this up, the flow chart. For a safe schools circumstance, special circumstance, the very last statement is conduct as appropriate,
Okay?
AFUBA, and implement.
So that's what's in LBI, so then I gotta reference back, even though that's board rule now, see what special ed rule
Yeah.
says. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'd
that
like
would
to know.
create some confusion for sure.
Yeah, and this, yeah, you're right to make that clarification. This is LRBI, this is not special education.
Right.
So,
So a state rule versus federal. So one of the things that we have a philosophy on in our district is time and space. I don't know if this will work.
please don't tell me he's gonna be bitten by the snake.
Scott's gonna touch the rattle.
Oh,
Okay, I'm gonna be able to get it here. I can't see it. Scott's touching the rattle. Ah! Whoa, 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 whoa. Scott, quit it.
Okay.
Quit it, quit it, quit it, quit it.
I don't know about you, but I do not like seeing snakes. I've seen a lot of them this
A
year.
little too closer.
But how many of you have teachers kind of doing that with your kids sometimes? I pulled up 80% of our emergency safety interventions this last year. 80% of them was when we took something away from the kid. One of them broke my heart. Kid had gone into the hallway, run away from class, but he had a clipboard, and he must have seen the Valentine's boxes that all the kids had made, and he must have wanted to make one like one because he was out there drawing it. So what did the tech do? They don't go and say, hey, where are you out here? I'm glad we found you. Let's get back to class. They take the clipboard away, get back to class. I couldn't find you. Whatever. I don't know all the statements. And guess what the student does? They go ballistic. Okay? We touched that rattle enough times that he said, I'm done. And I find that over and over again. So one of the philosophies we try to train on is time and space. Give them time, give them space, we'll still get back and we'll figure it out in a way that no one gets hurt. And so, that being said, sometimes that doesn't happen. You know, referring back to LRBI, right?
It is.
You know, it's there. Use that as a tool. Doesn't sound like it's gospel, but there are tools in there that you can use. Teach your teams LRBI. Here's one that's interesting because some of us have the use of timeout in our schools or just small rooms that we keep them barricaded in from time to time until safety can be established. So here was one that was put into a 5x4 isolation prison cell is what the parent called that. However, and so tried to sue saying you can't use those across the state of Kansas. So Kansas, and fortunately we get some immunity within the schools. There are times that we don't, and there's times that we don't include deliberate indifference when we just don't care if there's disability harassment going on in our schools. Don't do that. Always care, always follow up, always investigate. The other one is things that shock the conscience. I know people don't like timeout rooms and timeout situations. I realize that. None of us like using them either. But they don't, at this point, shock the conscience. What might shock the conscience is if you go in there and then duct tape it out and go back to teaching your class and not even checking on the kid the rest of the day. That would probably shock the conscience, at least my little conscience I have left. So look at that, shocking the conscience and deliberate indifference, and be aware of ways to avoid personal liability and just team responsibility. That's what I would learn from this, even though nothing really happened as a result of that. It doesn't mean that down the road, if we just say, oh, it's no big deal, if someone's getting harassed or bullied, it's not going to come back and get us. So those are the two rules that I see, or two phrases I see over and over again. Don't get there. Don't let your teams get there. Have a conscience, have a heart, take care of these kids. We want them. I think all of us, we're in this profession because we're pretty passionate about our students with disabilities. Here's a couple cases related to BIP. This is where I talked about maybe documenting what you do, that we don't always I don't think the courts always see all the efforts that every one of our special ed teachers are making, and general ed teachers, to getting that kid to make progress. So in this case, this is a student that has some problems. You know, I don't know if he has, you know, maybe some intellectual disabilities or, you know, other syndromes going on. But nonetheless, hitting, biting, pulling hair, hiking, all these things, the evidence reflected his behaviors escalated to the point where his one-to-one said, I'm out of here, I'm done. And however, the district did not incorporate in the student's IEP any positive interventions or develop a BIP, which resulted in the student's regression in both academics and behavior over the course of 2 school years. And then follow that up with one more, which is the informal behavioral initiatives on this one led to, hey, we did a lunch bunch, we did all these positive, great things for this student, but they never met to put it into a BIP. And so, as a result, that was identified as not doing anything helpful for the student because it wasn't formalized. And so can't say that enough. Formalize all the good you do. Your teams do good things, and when you're seeing this kid that's just starting to look a little different than the rest of the kids, get it formalized, get the parent input, and that's going to protect you a lot more than just saying, but we had lunch bunch, we had this chess club, we put 2 peer buddies on them at lunch. Great, put it in a plan, and tell the parent that's what you're going to do. I know some of those are hard because I don't know if I'm going to have chess club next month. I don't know if I'm going to have these things. But you can do it in ways that are generic.
So I just like to say sometimes if it's not written down, it might not happen.
It probably didn't.
You've got to write it down.
Yeah. So pull the team together. I know we don't have more time for more meetings, but we get to.
Well, we need to help our our regular educators recognize the value of that, because a lot of them are doing special things like you just talked about, but it's not written down, it doesn't show up on an IEP. They maybe have it on their teacher plan, but parents don't know, SPED doesn't know, it's just kind of happening, so I think that's really valuable.
Let me just go through a couple quick things in 1 minute and we'll try to be out of here. I think that's probably where we're timing is. So, prior written notice, if the district believes the evaluation is not necessary, if something that you want expressed to the parent, put it in prior written notice to the parent. Most of the time that's the IEP. Also, not providing an IEP required service to a transfer student may result in denial and I put this one specifically because it was related to a charter school that got a student over with adaptive PE. I don't have a adaptive PE teacher. We don't have them. But they didn't meet and change that, or they didn't agree to follow that IEP. Here's some charter specific ones that kind of led up to some things related to some practices in the past for some. You know, we're obligated to follow IEDEA. That's that supremacy law. If students have problems and we're not identifying them for child find, we do have child find within the scope of that school. I realize you don't have homeschool child find in private school, but you do have your own charter school child find responsibilities. Also, make sure you have the availability of continuum. Sometimes you have to contract, sometimes you have to do certain things or get to a situation where you can agree with the parent what the child needs. And then lastly, don't do things that would screen out or cancel out kids out of your charter schools. That's obviously things that have happened because OCR has written that in. Here's some director tools. Special ed rules, when in doubt, evaluate, account for money spent in special education, collaborate with other directors, annually train on some of these areas, child find documentation and accommodations and other trouble spots. Use facilitated IEPs if necessary with difficult parents. I found those very helpful with USPE. Remember the critical moments in the IEP process that we handed out. Use database decisions, and finally refer to LRP website. They have great cases that you can learn and have great resources. There's a must read on 504. And
Go back to that, what was that one?
It is a must read for charter schools, is the frequently asked questions basically related to 504. And again, I'll send that out. Just stay out of trouble, you know, do things to do, you know, work with others, collaborate. And I always look that if you have the attitude of working with parents, they're going to work with you. It may be slow, it may be tiresome, but they'll work with you. If I get in the way of that process, we're in a fight, we're in a complaint. Wisdom for a director is the reward of a lifetime of listening when you have preferred to talk. So thank you very much. Thanks for letting me visit. I'll look up that one thing, but I will get these slides out to you, and I think we're almost on time to your lunch. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.